This is AP World History Chapter 1, Part 2 on Before History. Today we're going to look at the Paleolithic Society. If you remember from the last screencast, we talked about pretty much the hominids from Australopithecus, who was considered the first hominid, all the way to Homo sapien. So now we're going to really look at, well, how did the Homo sapien live? And during this time, we're going to call this, like it says, the Paleolithic Society. And what that means is the Old Stone Age, where they're using stone tools to manipulate their surroundings in terms of hunting. So it really starts with the economy and society of hunting and gathering people. And I guess really a really big takeaway that you need to know about the Paleolithic Society is that there was pretty much social equality that existed during this time. And what I mean by that is that there was no such thing as private property the way we know it today. Um, People just didn't, keep into one land and stay in one land. Instead, they were moving around based on the environment, based on whether they had to get food. So there was no private property at this time. If there was going to be any influence, you were going to see it in terms of age, strength, courage, intelligence, fertility, force of personality. So if there was an influence in a tribe, it was because this person was older, they were wiser, or they were good hunters, so they were going to be the leader because of the strength they had, or fertility in terms of women because they were able to reproduce at, I guess, a higher, faster rate. So because of this, you see that relative gender inequality where all members contributed to survival. Everyone relied on each other. Women and children, they were often the ones that gathered. They were the ones that went to pick the berries and the nuts, and, got the plants. Men were often, obviously, the ones that were going to hunt the larger animals. But this interdependence, them relying on each other, that is what discouraged dominance between men and women. And that's why you see pretty much that equality that exists between men and women, because there's not one person saying, I'm a man, I'm better than you, or I'm a woman, I'm better than you. We're both contributing members to this little tribe we have. And often the tribes were in the bands of 30 to 50 members, but they were really good at exploiting the environment around them. One of the ways they did this was through big game hunting, especially the men. So some of the strategies they used, obviously, they used special tools. Sometimes they would even use disguises where they would dress up as the animal. They would put like the skin of a dead animal on them, and they'd go about in there and find a way to attack the other animals. Fires were also used to attack an animal or to kind of get an animal into one area, and then they were able to attack it from there. Even sometimes they caused disturbances where it would cause a stampede, it would force the animals to move, and therefore it would have their opportunity to attack an animal. But hunting was a big, important role. So, um, we talk about the Paleolithic Society, we talk about cave people, and this is really what these people were. They were, for the most part, some of them cave people. This is an example of, one of the archaeological sites of a cave, and this is how they lived sometimes until they had to move on to the next place. Here's another example. If they didn't live in a cave, they'd live in some sort of hut or teepee. Again, you see more caves here in this area. So again, it just depended on the location, whether it was going to be, a cave, or we're going to have some sort of hut that we're going to assemble. All right, so here are your first two discussion questions. Why was life in Paleolithic society so egalitarian? Egalitarian means equal. You need to remember that because you're going to hear it a lot throughout the year. So egalitarian means equal. And why is society today not reflective of Paleolithic society in terms of social status? So why don't we live the way we lived back then in the Paleolithic society? All right, take a couple minutes, press pause, and answer those questions. So the next thing we're going to talk about is, all right, we know how they lived, how it was pretty much equal. Now we're going to look at the culture. One of the factors that plays a role in the culture were actually the Neanderthal people. So I know we said it was Homo sapiens that lived during this time, but there was another type of person called the Neanderthal that was also living at the pretty much the same time as the Homo sapiens, and you can pretty much say that they died off because they just, whether they didn't have the intelligence to survive, nobody really knows for sure. But this is the area we find them in the Neander Valley of West Germany. And so, just to give you an idea of how they may have looked, this is the anatomy of the Neanderthal man in comparison to the Homo sapien. So even the way they're built was different from each other. But sometimes you would find them in the same region, and there was sometimes some interbreeding. However, it was very, very minimal. One of the things that did come or did contribute to the Homo sapiens was this idea that they got from the Neanderthals, such as deliberate burials and rituals. The idea of burying your dead, that is not necessarily a Homo sapien. That's not necessarily something we do, guys. This is something that we adopted from these Neanderthals. There's evidence to show that they deliberately buried their dead, pretty much recognizing this significance of life, life and death. So to continue on with the Homo sapiens, you do see this achievement of communication and the ability to begin to communicate more complex ideas better. You see this idea also of art being developed. These right here are called Venus figurines, okay? And they're named after the Roman goddess of love. And pretty much, obviously, you can see they have exaggerated sexual features. And it was the idea that these little figurines were there to generate new life. And what you need to think about is, why was that important back then? We're hunters and gatherers during this Paleolithic time. Why is this idea of creating new life important? In addition to the art that you see, we also had cave paintings that existed in those caves that I showed you in the last slide. This is an example of probably one of the most well-known paintings. This is the Lascaux painting in France, in a cave in France. So there's several reasons for why they believe there was these cave paintings. Some people think it was to mark, successful hunting. We capture this animal, now I'm going to put it on this wall. Others think it was sympathetic magic, that if I, draw this animal, then I will be able to control the animal and therefore I will be able to hunt it when I go out there. So different reasons for why the cave paintings existed. And most of the time they were made with minerals, plants, blood, saliva, water, animal fat. That's how you got the color in there. So this leads to your next questions, 3 and 4. What does fertility do? What does fertility do just, scientifically in the, most biological sense? What does it do? And number 4, why was fertility so important during the Paleolithic age? During this, old Stone Age? Think beyond the simple human reproduction. Okay, so some takeaways about this section. A big takeaway is this idea of equality, the idea that there's social equality, that there's gender equality, okay? That we are equal. That's huge because that's something you'll never see after this time period in history. That will change forever. And the other thing is the culture, the Venus figurines. Why did they paint these things, or why did they create these little figurines? What was the importance of fertility that it was so important that they would do this? So those are your big takeaways for this section. The next screencast will be the Neolithic era and the transition to agriculture, and that will cover the last part of chapter 1.